All right, English teacher friends. So in this writing workshop, I'm going to run through The Lottery, which is one of the most commonly taught short stories in the American high school curriculum. And personally, for me, I do this with sophomores. And later on, I inherit these sophomores in AP literature. And early in the academic year, I'm going to begin our short story unit with The Lottery and just show them how to read with greater complexity, because there's only so much you can do at the sophomore level, and then how to incorporate my templates of the declarative and the inverted thesis, as well as the syllogistic method for greater nuance, flair, spunk, pizzazz, the voice, the rhythm, and the flow, how to tackle a text at the AP level, at an AP caliber. So even though I'm going to focus on those deeper skills and getting at deeper reads for AP purposes, this writing workshop will work just fine for those teachers that are doing the lottery at the lower grade level. So I introduce my templates of the declarative and the inverted thesis as early as the 9th grade. And that's what we use to get anchored in a thesis statement in the introductory paragraph. And the syllogistic method I also introduce as early as the 9th grade. So you can adapt and twist these. They're malleable, and you can get them to suit your purposes no matter what grade level you're teaching. So one of the things that I emphasize all the time with my templates is this idea of you gotta Bob Ross your instruction. I often ask the question, what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? And in asking that question, it really accentuates the difference, philosophically between the assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of it. So imagine if Bob Ross were to come onto the screen right now and say, hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to include an old rickety New England wood-covered bridge. On your mark, get set, go. Right? If he were to take that approach, that's the assigning of painting. And all too often when I push into districts and work with teachers, I see a lot of assigning, graphic organizers, a lot of talk about the theory and technique of writing, the do's and the don'ts of writing. But when we explicitly teach, we take this Bob Ross approach where we get to the proverbial easel and canvas and we paint with our students. So we show them how to do the introduction. We show them how to do the topic sentences and how to embed the quotes with templates. And that's the cool thing about Bob Ross. He only used one template. It's known as a heuristic called the wet on wet technique. So every single time he ever painted, he used the exact same templates. And for me and my templates, that can be used across the expository modes, so rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, even research. We just use one set of templates every single time, so it totally demystifies the writing process. So the first question we're going to ask is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And since this is literary analysis, we're going to invert the thesis. So all FRQs on the AP literature exam, I tell my students to invert the thesis unless they have a reason that they can articulate and defend as to why they would declare. So declare I use for rhetorical analysis, and then synthesis, argument, and persuasion are a 50-50 coin flip. Same with research. So for literary analysis, we tend to 99.9% of the time invert. So this is what the declarative thesis looks like. And I'll just run through this quickly because it's not what we're going to be using you begin with the thesis. And oftentimes in argument and persuasion synthesis, you're asked, students are asked a direct essential question that they need to provide the answer to. And the answer to that essential question is the thesis statement. So sometimes in argument, it's best to be very clear, direct, concise, precise, and just drop the thesis in the opening line. From there, you flesh it out with context and background, sprinkle in a bit of tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. So in my classroom, for all of my students, regardless of grade level and ability, I run word study academies the entire academic year. So you should see my students flexing their muscles with their diction a little bit. And then sentence constructs, for those of you that are new with my video series and my work, I espouse the idea that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. I stole this idea from Strunk and White in their book called Write It Right. And my students will be able to do all sorts of syntactical manipulation to achieve voice, rhythm, and flow. Well, I guess hopefully achieve voice, rhythm, and flow. And then every single introductory paragraph, while students are manipulating the template, is going to be 4 sentences long, no more, no less. So exactly 4 sentences long. So let's talk about what our students are going to do for this particular introduction for the lottery. Yet end with the thesis. So in this sense, you might begin with the context and background. I've seen some teachers advise students to start with hooks, analogies. I'm not a big fan of that, but it works. If a student can pull it off, it works. So usually I have my guys just start with some context background, sprinkle in that tier 2 vocab without overdoing it. We don't want students to sound contrived or pretentious or get too out of their wheelhouse. Focus on those sentence constructs, exactly 4 sentences long. So here's the kicker with literary analysis, and this is especially true for FRQ1 and FRQ2 on the AP Literature exam. Implicit in every single one of those prompts are 2 questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? If our students answer those 2 questions within the inverted thesis construct, they're going to come out of the gates pretty blazing. So it sets them up to perform literary analysis, which is the demand of the assignment. It helps prevent them from slipping into plot analysis, which is mostly what teachers get when they're asking students to perform literary analysis. By default, students get into plot summation, and it sounds regurgitative, sort of like a Cliff Note summation, and we don't want that. So those 2 questions: what is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So let's Bob Ross a couple of these. So in the first 3 sentences, we are going to answer the first question: what is the authorial intent? And in the 4th sentence, we're going to answer the question: how does the author construct meaning? And when you answer how does the author construct meaning, the student is going to use the most salient terms and or devices that anchor the text, all right, that the author uses to make meaning. So let's see how this works. Unthinking conformity often stimulates a herd mentality that goes unchecked. So sometimes teachers refer to this as the universal theme. I refer to it as authorial intent. So even in rhetorical analysis in AP Lang, we refer to it as exigence. So what's Shirley Jackson's main point in writing this story? So start from the beginning again. Just kind of hit it, right out of the gate. Unthinking conformity often stimulates a herd mentality that goes unchecked. In effect, people can be like sheep and just follow course, completely devoid of thought or reason. Blinded by a need to be aligned with the status quo, people passively accept the unacceptable so as not to stir the proverbial pot. So we're 3 sentences in. We got the authorial intent, or the universal theme. Last sentence: how does the author construct meaning? And this is where you're going to hit the terms. Jackson's employment of the actual lottery and symbol of the black box arrive at this point. Right? So we got theme and symbol there. Every single time you can do the exact same thing. So here's a different student going to manipulate the inverted thesis paradigm. First three sentences, what's the authorial intent? Last sentence, how does the author construct meaning? Societies of people can be like lemmings plunging over the collective cliff right into a pit of death. So they're doing the little hook analogy thing, which is totally fine, but is still getting at the universal truth or the universal theme. Groupthink strips people of their capacity for individual thought. And instead, the masses huddle together to typically wrong rights. Even if someone seems to be so utterly illogical, the masses are capable of passively sitting back while the most ludicrous of occurrences unfold. We're in the fourth sentence, construction of meaning. Jackson expresses this phenomena through the actual process of the lottery and the motif of rule following. Let's go back to the first and we'll compare it to the second. Do you see how there is a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary in here? You don't have to overdo it. Unthinking, conformity, stimulates are all nice. Devoid, aligned. So don't overdo the vocab. I like to have a good blend of colloquial vernacular with the academic. I don't want my kids totally geeking out. So like that word, stir the proverbial pot. Good blend of academic colloquial vernacular. Look at the sentence constructs. Each one is different from the next to achieve that voice, rhythm, and flow. And again, kids don't need to go willy-nilly with their syntax, but definitely get them out of the habit of going short, simple declarative sentence followed by short, simple declarative sentence, or in other words, they stack independent clauses or adjective clauses atop each other. So this one as well has that nice tier 2 level factor, and the sentence constructs are all varied for voice, rhythm, and flow. So a third one's going to do the exact same. The student doesn't quite have the pizzazz of the other two writers, but still very methodic, dutiful introduction using the exact same inverted thesis. It is not uncommon for groups to take control of the collective thought process. And again, start with the universal theme. In other words, it is so much easier to be a follower than a leader. When groupthink occurs, things like right and wrong can go right out the window. Fourth sentence, construction of meaning. Jackson expresses these ideas through the extended metaphor of the lottery and the motif of blindly placing one's allegiance in rule following. So all day long, students can do this. So it works across the genres, FRQ1, FRQ2, all day long can do this. And I have a lot of videos in my YouTube channel. For example, to practice introductions where I use Oscar-nominated shorts. I have a number of those in the YouTube channel. So if you want to practice with your students how to do introductions like this within the mode of literary analysis, I got a ton of stuff in the YouTube channel to help with that. So the next question is this, because we're done. We're out of the gates, right? We have a solid foundation, good thesis. We've ascertained both those questions. Let's do the rest of the essay. So the question is, how do I write the body paragraphs? And I use a template that I call the syllogistic method. And the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. It comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, word wrangling, wordsmithing. And they would also often have these debates where they would throw out juicy questions like you see in texts like Plato's Republic. What is justice? And these great philosophical think tankers would step to the mic and they would drop their definition of justice, and they'd walk away from the mic thinking they'd won the world. And then the philosophers would huddle up and find all the holes in that person's logic and debunk it. Next person come to the mic, drop a definition. So in composition, we talk about line of reasoning a lot, and Aristotle called it cogency. We as composition teachers are just like Aristotle, in the sense that we want our students to be very logical, computative, mathematical, precise in the articulation and defense of their arguments in their body paragraphs. And Aristotle created a template or a heuristic to help kind of gather those thoughts and organize them, and he called it a syllogism. And all it is when you argue from premise to conclusion. So premise 1, a student might say arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. I don't think anyone would disagree with how that flows progressively, logically. And that's how we want our students to think on paper ultimately, is very point A, point B, point C, inductive, deductive reasoning, keep it cogent from start to finish. So in terms of performing literary analysis, the syllogism is going to look like this. So the first premise is going to be an argument containing literary terms and devices. And one of the things I emphasize with teachers and students is this: literary analysis is an expository mode, and all expository mode is argument. So you got to make sure that the student is arguing and not getting plot summative, right? The idea is not to regurgitate the story and put the story in his or her own words. So you got to argue, use the terms and devices. The second premise is going to be textual support, where the student is going to quote and paraphrase. And I like to see a teeter-totter balance in that, so don't do one more at the expense of the other. And the conclusion is going to be the textual analysis. So I always tell my students that the first premise is a promise. Go shake hands with that brother when you get to the end, right? It's not the conclusion of the essay, the conclusion of the body paragraph. You echo the thesis, echo the prompt, go shake hands with your brother at the end, right? So smart students ask me this. They're like, Mr. Kuhn, we're using templates, so I see that the introduction has to be 4 sentences. What's up your sleeve? How many sentences are appropriate for a body paragraph? And I tell them to shoot for 10. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence body paragraphs that we often see, even at the AP level, just aren't substantive enough. They don't have enough pith to fully substantiate and hold up an argument and defend an argument. So I say 10, don't exceed 12, otherwise you're just going to bloviate and bluther on and probably break the line of reasoning. So the next question that students ask is, how do I begin? Where do I begin? And I always like it when students give me some indication that they're well organized and that they have a chronology or a sequence planned out, sort of like a roadmap to their logic as they proceed through an analysis. So I tell my students, start where the author starts. So you'll see transitions like this, right from the onset. So start where Jackson starts. Drop your terms in here. The other thing I tell my students to do is this. First premise should be 3 sentences long. In this way, you keep the argument central. So on FRQ1 in AP language, the directions state it 3 times. Keep your argument central. And again, we're doing expository writing, so why aren't we saying this for literary analysis, FRQ1 and FRQ2 for AP Lit? Keep the argument central. So I say take 3 sentences, set up that argument. So look at how the student is going to use terms and devices to argue. Right from the onset, Jackson presents how normal and comfortable groupthink can feel for a collection of people. The blind allegiance and unthinking acceptance of what is unquestionably wrong gets overlooked simply for the human urge of fitting in and not stirring the pot. Immediately, the initial motifs and symbols introduced reinforce these natural tendencies as the setting is constructed and action builds. So if we put this into a promise, so oftentimes during writing workshops I say to students, put this in as a promise. What are you promising your reader? So we should see an exploration of motifs and symbols and setting early on in the story, because we have a chronology, we have a sequence. So immediately in the fourth sentence, we transition to the second premise. Let's start quoting and paraphrasing. Let's see how these motifs, the symbols, and the setting all get at this groupthink concept, right? If we're sustaining a line of reasoning, this has to happen. All the quotes and all the paraphrasing needs to be germane to the promise. So here we go. Blind thought gets ritualized and unknowingly accepted, so much so that everyone understood the whole lottery would take less than 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. All right, it's a decent enough quote. So it seems to be aligned. It's germane. So we quoted, we got to analyze it and keep it connected to that first premise. Little does it matter that one community is obligated to get stoned to death. Lunch must be promptly served at noon, the agreed upon time that is prearranged every single day of the year. No one ever questions why this annual event must occur, just as they do not question the rigidity of their schedules. All right, so you can't go on and on and on and on and on. So let's move on here. Let's get some more support because we got motifs, symbols, setting. We've hammered home the groupthink. Jackson repeatedly suggests this singular tradition ought to be drawn into question, yet the symbol of the box is a reminder of just how powerful groupthink can be. So we go on to the next slide here. The reader is told that the black box grew shabbier each year. By now, it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along the side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. All right, good quote, right? So we're talking about the black box. You got to quote the black box. So I like to have discussions with my students with regards to quoting with deliberation. You have to have the best quotes, even though we're using a template, and you have to have a second premise. You can't go willy-nilly with your quotes and paraphrasing, right? You made a promise that you have to keep. The annual lottery is also a traditional relic that needs to be replaced, if not completely removed from this society. But years blindly go by and nothing changes. Every year, one town member takes one for the team. Now we're at the conclusion. Let's go back here. We seem to have enough support and enough analysis to anchor back to this first premise. We're doing okay, right? So everything seems to be germane. Everything seems to be connected. We did not go on any bird walks. There's nothing extraneous in here. Now let's tie it all back. Echo the thesis. Echo the prompts. Keep the promise of the first premise. The power of groupthink can do this, completely rid one of their ability to think as an individual. Man can do some pretty bizarre and strange things when such a phenomenon goes unchecked. In the end, it's just like a lottery whereby one's blind allegiance might mean the calling of their number. And it's all good. It all ties back. So first premise, second premise, conclusion, try to keep it under 12 sentences in that ballpark. Have enough support and analysis. Keep it all cogent. Keep it all germane. So that's just one example of how we manipulate the template of the syllogistic method within the, confines of a body paragraph. And that's what my students do over and over and over and over again, every single body paragraph. So you can see there, they still can exercise their voice, their rhythm, their flow, their creativity, their analysis. It's just a scaffold, right? It's just some guardrails, and they can kick the scaffolding off once they've become adept enough writers. So just to wrap up here, a couple of things going on my end. I got a few irons in the fire. Many of you know that the Teach It Right 5-week Mastermind is now being offered through the National Writing Project. We are launching our first session August 9th, 2022. So you can visit nwp.org for more information on that. I also have a webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. The cool thing about this, having the National Writing Project run the course is, I'm still the lead instructor. It's still my content. I'm still teaching the course, and all the benefits and quirks of the original Mastermind are still in place. But National Writing Project has a bigger budget than I do. They have more funding, so the course is offered deeply discounted, and participants get 10 accredited hours towards their professional development, which was something as a single operation I could not do. The other thing is the school year is coming, a new school year is coming upon us. I'll be doing free webinars with Perfection Learning on a regular cadence. We're looking at a couple per quarter, maybe even going once a month. So pay attention to that. If you want these slides, you can email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Browse through my YouTube channel. There's plenty of content on there. And yeah, so check out a couple of places. Again, email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com with any questions, comments, thoughts, reflections. And to see some of those irons that I have in the fire, teachinghowtowrite.com is your place to go. So, all right, hopefully you enjoyed this. Happy teaching, happy writing.